Hi, my name's Daniel Horning. I'm in sales and marketing here at Woodwright in New Holland. We have a distribution center here where we sell stain and varnish, and in the last 2 years also epoxy to the woodworking shops and do-it-yourself people in the area. Today we're going to be pouring some samples from, I'm hoping to do a start to finish. It'll be on a couple different pieces of how to prep the wood and get it ready to pour, and then we'll pour a river and eventually do a pour over piece also where it's over the whole thing. Epoxy has been used not only in marine but also on concrete floors, and there's a lot of different applications for it, but the furniture builders in Lancaster County have caught on to the use of epoxy. So we have our Woodwright brand epoxy here. We can sell it in quarts, single gallons, which is what these are, and also 5-gallon buckets. And a gallon of epoxy would be very comparable to a good gallon of exterior house paint. Epoxy can look overwhelming, and some people think it might be too complicated for me. Some of our customers out of here are do-it-yourself people that have self-taught themselves, or it might be a big business where they're in a commercial setting where they're using a lot of it at a time. The important thing is to do a sample like we're going to be doing today, and maybe mess up on something like this first before you do a big project. And there's also a lot of good YouTube videos and different things online. The first step here with a sample or your actual project that you might do is to seal the edge, and there's a few different ways you can do that. You can mix up your epoxy and either brush it on, this piece is done, but brush it on with a paintbrush, or just take some tape and tape it off a little bit to keep it from running all over the place. And then sometimes what I'll do is just pour it in there and chase it around until it's all covered, and then put it on a table that's covered in plastic so it doesn't stick. And then when you put it in the form, once again covered in plastic so that it don't stick to your form piece. We're going to measure it. It's the length, the height, and the width. Length times height times width divided by 231 will give you the amount of epoxy that you need to fill the space. That's about 3/4 gallon, and that's going to be a 2-to-1, 2 parts of pour in for the big pour for the river, 2 parts of the part A, and 1 part of the hardener part B. With that much volume, you want less hardener. The chemical reaction between the resin and the hardener does create heat, and that's what you want in order to cure it. Or a big live edge table, it would be 2 parts of pour in of the part A and 1 part of the part B, so it doesn't go as fast. So we have 64 ounces of pour in A, which is the resin, and now we're going to put a little color in, and then it'll be 32 ounces of the hardener. And if I measured correctly, that should be plenty enough to do the sample piece and have some left over if we have a leak. Very small. I may not even use all this. Add more color if you think it needs it. Looks like it might be a little light. Okay, we have our color pretty well where we wanted, I think, what I had in mind. And we have two parts of the part A, and now we're going to add one part of the part B, and then we're going to want to mix it about 5 minutes. Sure you get it done. And this is pour in B. Now the color might lighten a little bit, and we can always add a little bit of color afterwards if we need to. And we're going to set a timer for 5 minutes and see if we can get it stirred up. So we have the color in, and I stirred the 2 parts of A, 1 part of B for 5 minutes, and it sat for 5 minutes without stirring it. And now we're going to stir it again for 5 minutes just to make sure everything's stirred properly. The part A and the part B are very different in viscosity, so they do not go together unless you put them together. You have to do the work. It will not go together on its own. And even after all this stirring, there could be a possibility there's still unstirred stuff on my stick. So you just stir until you're blue in the face. So we have the part A and the part B mixed together, the color the way I want it, and that mixing process was about 15 minutes. Now you just pour it in. Scrape some of this back in here. If you want to use a torch to get the bubbles out that have been stirred into the epoxy in the stirring process, you can use a torch if you want to. Daniel Horning here again to finish our epoxy project that we started a few days ago. It dries overnight and it's had a good long time to dry. We're gonna use it here at my friend Mike Fisher's. He's a furniture builder, to get it ready for the final pour. With his wide belt sander, we'll get this all cleaned up. But first we want to talk about his serving tray that he made here. Is one of his first trays that he made, and use epoxy for that project.
So really started using the epoxy to fill gaps and voids in live edge pieces, moving into more artistic river pours in small trays to 8-foot long tables, cutting boards, and also as a coating for reclaimed wood tables.
So before we can sand this, we'll have to take it out of this form, which is what we're going to do right now. All ready to go. Through the wide belt sander now, and Mike did a fine job of sanding it with the orbital with 220 grit. We're done with surfacing here at Mike's shop, and I'd like to thank Mike for letting us use his tools in his shop here this morning, and we're going to take it back to our shop to have it coated with the. We're back in the shop here to do the final coat on this piece here in front of us that we sanded. The pour over epoxy is what we're going to be using. It's the one that's made to get hard at with less volume. So we have only, it'll probably be about 14 or 16 ounces. We'll mix it 5 minutes, let it sit 5 minutes, and mix it again 5 minutes, and the mixture is 50-50. Some people take the mixing process a little too lightly sometimes. They think, well, I think I did it 5 minutes. Don't really set a timer to keep themselves accountable. And then when it doesn't harden, we get the phone call that, hey, my project is not turning out well. The epoxy's been poured for a day and a half, and isn't this stuff supposed to dry in a couple hours? And one of the first things that comes to mind is, well, how was your mixing process? And if you cut corners on the mixing process, you're very likely to have something happen that you don't want. So we had about 10 minutes total of mixing, and probably about 5 or 10 minutes of set time, just to let it kind of come together, do its chemical reaction. So we're ready to pour it on this piece and spread it out with this piece of plastic. There's different size teeth on each side, and the bigger the teeth, the thicker the coat, and you just drag it across and it'll spread it out. Also use a paintbrush to get the sides a little bit. And just the way I took the bubbles out of the river part, when we did that with the color, there's also bubbles on the pour over, but there's some right here, right on the river. We're about done with the top coat. Maybe a few more bubbles to catch here and kind of keep our bottom edge clean, so there's less to sand later. And then it'll be dried to the touch in about 3 or 4 hours, but it won't be hard enough to do anything with it until 24 hours, another day or two. We can do whatever we need to do to it. And then we'll also finish the bottom either with another coat, the bottom side of the piece with another coat of pour over epoxy, or we can also just spray varnish on it. So a few days ago, we started off with 2 pieces of wood that looked similar to these. These are walnut, that's maple, and put in a form. And where we are now is the epoxy drying and setting up with the last coat of pour over. And tomorrow, it'll be hopefully clear and hard like this one. I enjoyed doing this little demonstration, and hopefully you enjoyed following along, and maybe it'll spark some interest in for you to be able to do a project yourself at some point. I had mentioned earlier, there's a lot of YouTube videos and different websites where you can find a lot of valuable content online. And we're also here in New Holland at our warehouse, at the Woodwright warehouse in New Holland, and we'd be happy to help you out and answer any other questions you might have.